All right, so we're here this afternoon. It's me, Kat, and my good friends Ken and Bonnie Gilliard. We're here to tell a story about rights and freedoms and mobility rights in Canada, in the province of New Brunswick. Bonnie, would you like to maybe introduce yourselves, and then we'll go into the subject matter of the story of which we are here to tell.
Well, we're just Ken and Bonnie Gilliard. We have been pastors for many years. It doesn't really pertain to this story, but that's our background. And we live here in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And do you want to say anything?
And being pastors, it does a little bit pertain because probably 16 years ago, we had disagreement with a town, and we had to look up our rights and our freedoms. So coming into this stage of what's going on now in Canada, we already had a bit of background of researching our rights and freedoms. So, you know, it wasn't strange to us to stand up for our rights and freedoms.
Yeah, so we already knew some of our rights and freedoms from an issue that we had quite a few years ago. So
that just speaks to a good point that so many of us don't actually know what our rights and freedoms are, because we've never really been taught what they are. We don't have discussions about what they are, and unless we find ourselves backed into a corner, sometimes we don't feel the need to take that initiative either. So that's, I guess, a nice lead in to the topic. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your trip, the paperwork that you gathered in order to be able to gain mobility rights, and how that worked out for you recently?
So our daughter lives in the US in New York State. So where we cross over normally across the border would be in Ontario from what would be that bridge there? Johnstown border.
To Ogdensburg, New York.
Right. So when we were, our daughter needed us for a medical emergency. She needed, it was essential that she saw us. So we decided that we would go and see her, knowing that there is mobility restrictions here in Canada for the very first time. So we weren't sure what we were going to face. So when we left, we didn't have anything prepared when we left, and it seemed that we got into Ontario without any events really. So where they had a checkpoint between Quebec and Ontario, we just continued to drive through. We never even stopped. So, and they didn't come after us or anything. So we got through there. We got to the border. So we had traveled over 10 hours to get to our destination, to the border. And when we arrived there, they asked us what made us think that we could cross over into the US. And so we proceeded to tell them because, you know, we had read that for essential reasons that that they might make exceptions. So they
and I told them I had called ahead to a border crossing, not the Ogdensburg one because they weren't answering the phone, but I called the next one up the river, and I gave him our story, and he said I would consider that essential. And I said, so you would, but maybe somebody else wouldn't. And he said, unfortunately, it's basically the opinion of whoever's in charge at the time.
So when we got there, we gave her the details of our situation with our daughter. And she was sympathetic, very sympathetic and empathetic towards us. She said, I'm going to go to bat for you. She said, right now that it's not her decision anymore, the ones that are sitting there at the border. She said, I have to take this to my supervisor. She took it to her supervisor, and the supervisor said it wasn't his decision, that it had to go to the chief administrator that's off-site. So they even took it that far, and they came back and they said, sorry, we don't, they said that they had to keep what's that word, like uniform, be consistent and not allowing people over into the US, and that they're hoping to reopen on the 21st of June. And we said, but our daughter needs us now. And they gave us a turnaround order. They refused us entry. So
how long was that process? How long were you like sitting there kind of waiting for that to take place?
15, 20 minutes.
20 minutes, I'd say, yeah.
Okay, so it's really just one person after another, no, no, no.
Yeah.
Right.
So then they turned us around to go back over the Canadian side. And again, we were questioned on the Canadian side, you know, why did you attempt to go over? And so we gave our story again. And he was very moved by our story. And he said they didn't find that essential. And we said no. And he said, I'm sorry to hear that. And he gave us back our passports and said, try to have a nice day. So I must say that they were empathetic. They weren't, you know, I was kind of expecting that they might be militant towards us, but they weren't. They were empathetic, but not empathetic enough to, you know, classify our situation as essential, which we still feel that it was essential for us to be able to see our daughter. They said you can actually fly. So our daughter's house was like 15 minutes away from where we were at the border, literally. So you could almost see her place.
Through the woods.
Yeah. So they said
no major metropolitan area.
this is very rural area.
Farmland.
They said you can actually go to an airport and board an airplane and come into the country that way. And I said, that doesn't even make sense. I said, here we are alone in our own vehicle. And if there is, you know, a pandemic or a fear of a deadly virus, then, you know, it would seem to me that it's safer for us to be in our own vehicle and cross over to get to our daughter's place rather than loading onto a plane and be shoulder to shoulder with strangers in an airplane breathing the same air. So that doesn't make any sense about their rules of health and safety.
If I may ask, and Ken, when you called to see if this would be permissible, did they give you any definition for what constitutes an essential purpose for travel? Or was it, how is it seeming to be defined from you as a customer, let's say?
Yeah, it seemed to be a matter of opinion. He had no set guidelines or rules or boundaries. He just heard out my story and he said, I would consider that essential. But he said the person in charge may not consider it essential.
And I think that the rules can change as well, because by the time we got to the border, they said that they had to stay consistent until their opening. So I think that maybe orders had came down since he had called saying, you know, don't let anyone across until our opening on the 21st.
Because all these mandates for 15 months have continued to shift and move and bounce back and forth and give people hope and then take it away and, you know, bring on a strong mandate and then back off halfway. And then people are happy that it's only half the mandate, which is twice what it was 2 weeks ago, but they seem happy about it, you know.
It's very confusing for sure. And hypocritically, you know, it's impossible. There's consistency, you know, this word that was used. Where is it? What is it? When there's no definitions in place, when everything is a matter of opinion and it's situationally based, yet policy driven. Why? Yeah. So anyways, okay. So you're at the Canadian side of the border. Ultimately, he says you can jump on a plane if you want. You can basically see your daughter's home and you're being turned away. What happens next?
So we decide to go to our parent-in-laws, and in Ontario, it's on lockdown. So basically, what we were doing was illegal according to their mandates. So, you know, here we go.
Not illegal according to the Constitution.
Yeah.
Or the Charter.
Mandates are not laws, they're mandates.
Yeah. So according to the mandates, what we were doing was wrong, and that our parent laws were at risk of, you know, because they do have snitch lines set up, and it has been reported that people have been told on by their neighbors and things like that. So here we are at Ken's parents' place. And
I joked with them. Now, we don't smoke marijuana, just to make that clear right from the start. But I joked with them and I said, if the police drove by and saw me sitting in your yard smoking marijuana, they would charge me for sitting in your yard. Like,
Things have changed.
just
Things
crazy.
are changing.
Yeah. So, you know, and I work for a company that I book hotel rooms around the world. And every shift that I have people that are flying in from all around the world into Canada, and I'm booking them hotel rooms. And so they have 3-day mandatory stay in a hotel, and then they're free to go. They're not even Canadian citizens, some of these people. So they come in and they stay at a quarantine hotel for 3 days at their own expense, and then they're free to go to their destination. My parent-in-laws, who are Canadian citizens, can't even apply to come and see us in New Brunswick, you know, and we, during their lockdown, we were not even permitted to be actually at their home. So it just seems like that there's a lot of double standards here, that nothing is uniform. It's very confusing. And so it's just downright frustrating is what it is.
And all while this is going on, the Trudeau government gives an exemption to a hockey team so they can play hockey across the borders.
Yeah, there's been a lot of big sports events and concerts lately, hasn't there?
Yeah,
Elsewhere.
the NH, while we
You
were
know,
away,
hockey is essential, I
Yeah.
guess. That's the opinion of the government now.
while we went to try to attempt to go across the border to see our daughter, that's when the NHL had permission and they were playing their games, and there was so many people in the audience, you know, for that game. So there was exemptions that were given for travel from the US into Canada. So, you know, it's very, very hypocritical. To me, our situation was a lot more essential than playing a sport game. You know, our daughter needed us, still needs
And
us.
while we were in Ontario, the Ford government lifted the restrictions in London, Ontario for a funeral to take place, where reportedly 100,000 people showed up. Even Justin Trudeau himself went to this funeral. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't have had the funeral, that, you know, because that is, but why is their funeral essential and our family members aren't essential? You know, there's been people that have had family members pass away and they've not been allowed to go see them before they passed away. They're not allowed to go to their funeral. They're just left stranded.
People haven't been able to mourn their loved ones or be with their loved ones during a critical time. So when we were there, we were people of prayer. So I kind of like, my emotions were derailed, just to say the least, for a couple of days after we had the turnaround order. And we have the prayer group with you, Kat, and some great people in our group, and they prayed for me and prayed for us, for our situation, because as we were starting to read the rules and the regulations of getting back into New Brunswick, it seemed very strict. Like, in order for us to come back, we had to enroll in what they call their Emergency Act program and have to quarantine. There was a possible PCR test on the 1st, 4th, and 8th day. Even the possibility, if they wanted to, they could have put us into a quarantine hotel for 3 days at our own expense, even on land.
And part of the stress was, as we entered Quebec from New Brunswick, there was nobody on the Quebec stopping you, even questioning you going into Quebec, but we could see the other side of the highway and it looked like a military installation. There was lights flashing, cars all over the place, you know, officers.
Intimidating. It's very intimidating looking.
With guns.
Certainly. Yeah, this is Canada. We are not used to that regularly.
And they're calling these checkpoints borders, and never in Canada have we had borders. So, you know, they've already changed the language
From boundaries.
from boundaries to borders in Canada. We should not be calling these places borders. These are boundaries, and these are illegal checkpoints is what they've set up, really, because In Canada, we do have mobility rights, which we're going to get into. So here, Ken left the room after we had a time of prayer, and he came back and he said, I know exactly what we're going to do. He said, we are not filling out their papers. We are not entering into getting permission to go back into New Brunswick. We are going to print off a package, and when they ask us for our papers, we're going to give them these papers. And
the first one is our mobility rights.
Yeah.
That we have the right to freely travel through Canada. We have the right to go from one province to the other, whether it's to visit or whether it's to gain employment. There's to be no hindrance.
Yeah, let me just read it here. So charter, it's in the charter, section 6, the mobility rights. Every citizen of Canada has the right to enter, remain in, and leave Canada. Every citizen of Canada and every person who has the status of a permanent resident of Canada has the right to move and to take up residence in any province and to pursue the gaining of a livelihood in any province. So that is our mobility right here in Canada as being a permanent citizen.
And right inside our passport, because people say always when we post stuff, what's your source? What's your source? Well, get out your Canadian passport. That's just the photocopy of the inside cover of everybody's passport. And it says here, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada requests in the name of Her Majesty the Queen, all those who it may concern to allow to bear and pass freely without delay or hindrance, and are afforded to bear such assistance and protection as may be necessary. So we are allowed to travel throughout Canada without delay or hindrance.
And that it's their duty to assist us in that. So so we photocopied that. We also printed off the Nuremberg Code because, I felt really under threat of being subjected to a medical procedure of a PCR test. And if anybody doesn't know what a PCR test, well, look into the PCR tests anyway. It's they do have a lot of false positives. And besides that, we have bodily autonomy. That's another thing. And we printed off the Nuremberg Code, which are 10 things to the Nuremberg Code, that we have bodily autonomy and that I have a right to refuse any kind of medical procedure or treatment or experiment. And so we
the contact tracing program, which you're subjected to the moment you take the PCR test, which also, what is the name of the chemical, the carcinogenic chemical that's on the test? Ethylene oxide?
I believe so.
Yes, I believe that it is. So
another serious concern for folks who are being subjected to these tests on an ongoing basis over a prolonged period of time, for sure.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. So I was like, we are not going to subject ourselves to any of that. And we have bodily autonomy and we're going to say no. So, so those were the things that we copied. We put into an envelope like this. So we were very prepared. We read over our rights, so that we would know what they are, fresh in our minds. And when we got to the checkpoint between Quebec and New Brunswick, we just thought, okay, maybe we could just drive through like we did from Quebec into Ontario and they not stop us. So ended up, as we were driving through, we were behind a transport truck. We were supposed to go off to the right, but we were going straight through. And a guy is like waving at us, to basically get our attention, and Ken just waved back at him and we just kept driving. So
after all, it's New Brunswick. Canadians wave to each other, right?
So, well, the thing is this is not, these checkpoints are illegal. So unless we're being stopped for, doing something illegal, then, we felt that it's in our full right to be able to be mobile. So they came after us with flashing red lights. So we did pull over, because we're not about people that wants to break the law or anything like that. So we pulled over and he was a bit frustrated with us and said, you know, we were trying to get your attention to pull over. Ken said, oh, I thought that you're waving. I just waved back at you. He said, no, you're going to turn around.
And I said, hold on. I have no idea who you are. You need to identify yourself.
So immediately, I want to say this, immediately we started videoing, because it's always going to be your word against their word. And oftentimes your word is not going to be taken. So it's very important that everybody knows that in Canada that we are allowed to record any conversation or video anybody or anything, as long as you're a part of that video. As long as you're a part of that conversation, you can't just go and hide a device somewhere and walk away and you know, and listen in on somebody's conversation. But if you're a part of that conversation, you are allowed to video. If they tell you you can't video, yes, you can. You can, because you're a part of that video. That is your right.
So he did identify himself. And then he said, you needed to stop back there and sign into the program. And I said, what program is that? And he said, the, you know, the tracking and tracing and quarantining program. And I said, we are not signing into any program. We're Canadian citizens.
And we're going to go home.
And we're going home.
We're going home to New Brunswick.
And he said, how will we be able to track your quarantine? And Bonnie said, we're not doing that.
I said, we're not doing that either. And he goes, oh. And
then he walked back to his car to get some reinforcements. We didn't know how many vehicles were going to come at that point, but only one other one came. And the gentleman came to the window and he started talking.
Very much more intimidating than the first guy. So he was kind of like a little bit more forceful, saying, you are going to turn around, follow me, go back and register. And I did the same thing.
I put up my hand and I said, hold on. I don't know who you are. You need to identify yourself. And, you know, with me putting up my hand and asserting myself, you know, it's not about being aggressive, but it's you need to stand for your rights and freedoms. You need to take authority that you have. We have authority as Canadian citizens. And the Charter of Rights and Freedoms wasn't written by the government giving us permission. It was written by the citizens to tell the government its limitations.
Yeah, so they have limitations and they've actually overreached into our rights.
Significant overreach.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We won't get into today.
And when was the last time that we have ever heard of any checkpoints and having to show your papers? This would be back in Nazi Germany, right? So we have to really understand that this is communism tactics.
So then the second gentleman said, here's how it's going to work. We're going to escort you back there. And I said, you are not escorting us anywhere.
We are not turning around.
We're not turning around. We are going home. And I went through the same pieces of paper with this gentleman. And when I read out of the inside of the passport, he's like,
well, first of all, I was saying to him, he kept saying over and over again, oh, yes, you are. You're going to turn around. You are going to quarantine. You are going to do things. And I said, no, we are not. No, we are not. And I kept saying, no, we are not. And and then he said to me, he said, I am not talking to you. I'm talking to the driver. And that's when Ken spoke up.
I said, hold it right there. She is a Canadian citizen. She has the right to freedom of speech. And when you address us, you will address us both.
So, you know.
And he said, okay.
Yeah. So when Ken asserted that, you know, he was like, okay. And so we said, we are not going to do anything that you've told us to do. We have asked the government for proof of their emergency measures, proof of why they would have these in place. They have yet to give us any proof. And we say, so we are not going to follow these mandates.
And I forgot one thing. When both of them started to talk, I said, your emergency measures does not supersede the Constitution or the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So he then asked for my driver's license. And I said, absolutely. And I pulled it out and handed it to him. And he looked a little bit bugged that I did, because see, we need to know the law. And had I refused to give him my driver's license, then he had the right to legally arrest me. So I gave him my driver's license. Then he takes it, walks behind the truck, has a discussion with this other officer.
And before that, though, I did ask. This is where he told me that he wasn't talking to me. I asked him several times, "Are you detaining us? Are you arresting us? Are you detaining us? Are you arresting us?" And by the third time, I said, "Are we free to go?" And that's when he said no and asked you for your driver's license.
Right. But when he did take my driver's license, he went to the back of the truck, our truck, and he was talking to the other fella. We're watching in the mirror. She's filming. The second officer got in his truck and did a U-turn and took off back to the checkpoint. The other officer came up, just handed me my driver's license and said, "Have a good day."
So we were free to go then. So, but when we did do this, we weren't sure whether we were going to end up with a fine or be taken to jail or forced into a quarantine camp. But we had already determined by the time we got there that no matter what we were going to face, that we were going to refuse, that we were not going to comply.
Because we have to stand for our rights and freedoms. If we don't stand up, nobody's going to stand up for us.
That's right. And to be clear, you drove to the US border not even knowing if you would be allowed to go through. And you had to pass through checkpoints along the way, not knowing if you would be allowed to go through. So that is the reality of our situation. We have no mobility rights. We have to ask permission to see our family members, even if they are in time of crisis, or we are, and that permission can be refused based on inconsistent policies which are not defined, which are unlawful and illegal at their foundational roots, and violate everything that Canada on paper stands for.
Absolutely.
And it's all because of illegal emergency measures acts that they have never been demonstratively proved that there is a pandemic. And every time they get challenged on proving the pandemic, they back off.
They drop charges.
They drop charges. There was a doctor in New Brunswick that was charged last year for not following their program properly. And his lawyer prepared to go into that case and to ask the government to demonstratively prove the pandemic so that their emergency measures would be a lawful act. And 11 days before his court case, the government just decided we're going to drop all charges because they don't want it going to court.
And here's one of the problems with that case is some of us in New Brunswick wished harm on this man. There was an immediate presumption of guilt on this man justified by the pandemic, which has not been justified scientifically, medically, numerically, in any shape or form. The attitude, the mentality of us, not only are we so ill-equipped to stand up and assert our rights for freedoms, we have to realize how easily we can be manipulated into violating rights and freedoms of other human beings for no reason. So this is a very slippery slope we are on. We have to be autonomous over understanding our rights legally and our moral obligation to one another. So I just feel like that you said.
And
all right, guys.
New Brunswick, New Brunswickers, some of them did jump to conclusions, ridiculing, and were quite nasty to this doctor because the news said he was guilty. We are innocent until proven guilty. And, just because the news says something, and here's the whole thing, people in Canada are brainwashed by the news. They think whatever the news says is true. Go and do some research for yourself and check out these things.
Yeah.
And who's to say that doctor, he's a doctor, he sees people in the hospital. Who's to say one of his patients didn't bring that COVID to him? There is no way to trace the origin of
Back
these
to
things.
zero,
Back
yeah.
to ground zero.
I just want to
It's impossible.
I want to share this scripture to end this here. And it's a scripture in Isaiah 10, verse 1. And it says, "Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees." And in Canada, we have not really been underneath unjust laws or oppressive decrees, but we are now. And I do ask all Canadians, you know, just like our anthem, "O Canada," stand on guard for thee. You know, let's stand together and guard our nation. They want to make us a part of globalism. And we are a nation, and we're not going to give up our nationality, the nation of Canada. I'm not saying that there isn't problems in Canada, but overall, it's not been oppressive and using laws to oppress the people. And we need to take a stand against that. We have a moral obligation, because it's not just for us. You know, it's about generation after generation after generation. We have to look at the future of Canada. So that starts with us here today. You know, what do we want our Canada to be like for generations to come? And we have 5 grandbabies, 4 grandbabies, 1 on the way. And we know what we want Canada to look like for them. We don't want it to be an oppressive Canada. We don't want it to be under socialism and communism. And every socialistic society ends up into communism, and it's very, very dangerous. So if people don't know what is actually happening, which I'm actually shocked that there's a lot of people very ignorant about it, start looking into it. Start looking into this, because we want our Canada to be glorious and free.
And to your point, Ken, where the media does manipulate so much, and every person can be empowered to understand those linguistic tactics, to guard ourselves against that. They also do report aspects of what is happening that should be extremely alarming to every single one of us. So you don't have to look, none of us have to look far to start to realize how very serious this situation is. And I just so appreciate you guys, not only for taking that personal risk to make this trip, although I know, you know, a mother's love is compelling, and a father's love too. So I understand why you did it, but also to share your experience with it and this information. I'm wondering, can you just, as we close, quickly go through what documents you have in your package again, just before we end?
Yes, we photocopied the inside of the passport and the Nuremberg Code for Bodily Autonomy.
It has a lot more to do than that, but one of the things is bodily autonomy.
Yeah, you know, not subjecting yourself. You have the right to refuse medical treatment of any kind. We also had the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms with the mobility rights on there.
All right. So, I mean, put it to the test. We have to be strong, and we are fighting, because we need to.
I am glad that we put it to the test, and I do challenge other people to put it to the test as well. No guarantees that there's not going to be a fine or different things happen, but we do have to push back, I believe.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Love you.
Yeah.